Hello and welcome to the programme. Never has the future of Europe been in closer focus. And today we're going to try and see where it's all going. We're putting your questions to the candidate for the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats, Guy Verhofstadt.
And we will be bringing him out in just a moment. But as you can see here, we have tried to change things up a little bit on our set. We have brought in a live audience with the help from the Université Libre de Bruxelles. Welcome,
Hello,
guys.
hello all.
So what's the plan, Darren?
Well, the plan is there are two of us this time round, one candidate, live questions from that audience, and of course from you at home. And as you'd expect here on Raw Politics, we've got our own unique takes on the candidates, which you'll be seeing throughout the programme.
And as we always say, the most important thing about tonight is you, your questions and your reactions. So let's go over to Maeve and Jack at our social media hub, who is keeping an eye on all of that for us. Guys.
Absolutely. As Tessa and Darren were saying there, we would love to hear from you throughout the programme. Find out what you think of the Belgian man, Guy Verhofstadt. And if you have, of course, any questions or comments for him. Well, the information to get in touch, it's coming up right there on your screen. You can email at rawpaul@euronews.com. Or if you're tweeting tonight, make sure you use that hashtag #RawPolitics.
We have partnered with Facebook on this one. We are streaming live there. Maeve and I will be following all of your comments throughout the show, so keep posting them. And if you use that hashtag #RawPolitics, we are able to bring your comments up onto our board and send them straight over to Guy Verhofstadt on the sofa.
Indeed, so do get those comments coming. We're waiting for you. OK, let's get started. He is the reason we are here, the candidate for the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats, Guy Verhofstadt.
Hello.
Welcome. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello, hello, welcome. It's a big sofa.
Yeah, it's a big sofa. It's better to sleep in it than to answer questions, I have the impression.
First of all, we should say thank you very much for joining us, because we did see on Twitter over the weekend that you've not been well and been in hospital.
Yeah, I was doing campaign with the Lib Dems in London. I went to Strasbourg for the big rally of Renaissance. The list of Emmanuel Macron, and I got a little problem with my kidneys in Paris, so I was stopped.
But thank you for being here.
No,
anyway.
I'm here. I'm back.
You did mention London, so you were there. We've seen a lot of press coverage. Not all of them great, but not all of them great. So you don't know.
I've never seen so much cameras. I've never seen so much. Journalists together in a small garden.
And when you have that much criticism, especially from the UK, what do you think of that?
No, there are half of them who are in favour that you are there, and half of them who are against you. That's exactly the outcome of the referendum.
You have become so much of a lightning rod, though, for the kind of Brexiteers.
No, what I tried to do was, I was there not as a Brexit coordinator or negotiator. I was there as the leader of the Liberal and Democrats in Europe, as the candidate for European elections, and I wanted to support Vince Cable and the Liberal Democrats because it's the most pro-Remain party, and I am pretty sure they're going to have a great result in this election, even with the enormous battle that they got. It will be a battle between the Lib Dems on the one hand and the Brexit party at the other.
Well, we will
talk about Brexit a bit later on, but many people do know you in relation to Brexit, but also for your headline-grabbing comments. But that's not all there is to Guy Verhofstadt, so let's get to know him a little bit more. Meet Guy Verhofstadt, a big beast of the European Parliament who's no stranger to the spotlight.
The MEP Guy Verhofstadt.
One of Europe's most prominent Liberal MEPs.
I spoke, as you said, to Guy Verhofstadt.
He spearheaded the European Parliament's approach to Brexit, should Theresa May step down.
That's also not our competence.
And launched a staunch defense of the rule of law across the bloc.
Your interest is not the Hungarian interest. What we are defending here is Hungarian democracy and the interest of the Hungarian citizens.
As leader of the Liberals and Democrats, he's had a front row seat on Europe's biggest debates, clashing with visiting leaders.
So that you're a real leader and not a false prophet. Do it!
But he knows what it's like to sit in that seat. Guy Verhofstadt was Prime Minister of his native Belgium for almost a decade. He introduced same-sex marriage in 2003 and on the world stage resisted British and American calls to join the invasion of Iraq. Prime Minister? Check. European Parliament? Check. And now he has his eyes on the European Commission. So how would President Verhofstadt shape Europe's future? He believes in a common European response to the migration crisis, champions the transition to clean energy, And he wants to increase European defense cooperation, boosting the EU's role on the world stage. Often accused of trying to bulldoze national sovereignty, this Brussels veteran believes more Europe is the answer to the bloc's problems.
I don't think anyone could deny that you've got an impressive CV in many regards, but in today's era, does that almost count against you, that you're kind of an established kind of career politician that maybe isn't really in touch with ordinary Europeans?
Career politician. Yeah, I did nothing else than politics in my life. So I started as a local councillor in Ghent in my city, and then I went into national politics. So it's true that that's the only thing what I know. That's politics, but I don't think that's a problem. The question is, what are your opinions? What are your vision? And I try to do politics with passion and with vision, because I think that are the two main elements characteristic for a good politician. Not to run behind the public opinion, but trying to shape the public opinion.
And you're surely not to get attention when doing that. All right, over the last few weeks, we've been asking you to send in your questions, and you've been doing so for the candidates by video, WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, and email. So many ways to get in touch. But before we get to them, let us first get to our first audience question of today from Giacomo Orsini from the ULB, Université Libre de Bruxelles. So Giacomo, what is your question?
Yeah, hi, thanks.
Hi.
Thank you very much. You spoke more times in the Parliament of a political crisis on the back of migrants, which I would say academia agrees, data agrees, is a political crisis. So do you plan something to go beyond that political crisis on migration if you become president?
Yeah, because I think this crisis is mainly a crisis because of a lack of European policies. So nationalists and populists are pointing the finger to Europe, but it's not Europe that is the source of this crisis. It's because of a lack of European policies. There is no European border and coast guard, first point. There is no European asylum system, because the existing Dublin system is mainly the opposite of a European system. There is thirdly not a European economic migration system, giving the possibility for people to come in a legal way to Europe. And I think that my first priority would be to tackle all these tragedies in the Mediterranean by establishing these three building blocks: European border and coast guard, a common European asylum policy and criteria, and at the same time a European economic migration policy, so that you can make the difference between those who are coming for political reasons, real refugees, and those who are coming for economic reasons.
But one thing that is not on that list is that you also haven't got a common European policy or unity on a policy. Europe's divided on this issue of migration. How are you, given your take on many of the kind of populist right-wing leaders, as some would describe them in Italy, for example, and Hungary, how would you bring Europe together behind an immigration policy that works for the entire continent?
By using the majority rule. The problem with it is all this.
So forcing countries to fall into line.
But yeah, because today what the European councils, the member states have decided is that all these policies have to be shaped by unanimity. You know very well when it is with unanimity that it will never happen. Never work. There's always one country who is saying, I don't believe in it, I don't follow it. So the first thing to do is to apply the treaty, because in the treaty we're all saying that has to be with majority ruling. If we apply the majority ruling, we can have the European border and coast guard, we can have the European Dublin system reformed, the asylum system reformed, and we can have a European economic migration. So it's just a question of will of the member states of the European Union to do so. So the main problem is in the European Council.
Okay, but very quickly, before we move on to another question, it's that you say you want to tackle also the very real tragedy in the sea, which is, when people are dying. So what do you say to leaders who, we've seen boats waiting for rescue, we've seen borders closed. So what do you say to those leaders, and how do you get them in the immediate...
It's a pure scandalous attitude. So to do policies on the back of people, I don't say all, but most of them are suffering, are fleeing war, are living in poverty.
But you can't force leaders of
No,
countries.
the way to do it is very simple. Let's organize a border and coast guard. Let's give the possibility also for these people, these migrants, these refugees, to ask for asylum, not in Europe, but also on the borders of Europe. For example, in our embassies or consulates in Egypt,
So
in
outside
Libya,
the borders.
outside the border, then in these circumstances, people are not obliged to jump into the hands of these human traffickers. You know, that people have to pay 5,000 euros, 6,000 euros. That's all their fortune to these human traffickers. So we have to stop it. And the only way to stop it is to recognize that people who are suffering, who are fleeing war, can ask for protection in our consulates, in our embassies outside the European Union.
OK, well, let's move on to our next question. Let's go to Facebook. It comes from Sophie Orien, who is from Paris in France. And she wants to know, and it's coming up here on screen, will we ever become the United States of Europe? An aspiration, a long-held aspiration of yours.
Yeah.
Will it ever happen?
The first book that I ever published on Europe was in 2005, 2006, and the title was United States of Europe. I was still member of European Council, Prime Minister, and my colleague said, "You're crazy, Verhofstadt. You want to create the United States of Europe." But it's not a new idea. It's the idea. The first, I think, who used that word was Victor Hugo, a Frenchman, a famous writer who said, "Yeah, we need," and that was in the 19th century. The future of this continent is the United States of Europe.
But is that simply denying the simple fact that a lot of the countries have different speeds of economic development, have different taxation procedures, have different? I mean, but you still have the concept of the multi-speed. Not everyone is on the same page. Not everyone has the same rule of law, protection. So how do you have this United States of Europe?
That's the same in the United States of America. They have
you don't have different countries with different histories.
That's not true. They have 50 different constitutions.
Yes, but
they have 50 different flags. They have 15 different armies.
But not
they have 15
histories.
No, they have even difference in death penalty that we don't have in Europe. That's not true. Don't believe this. The United States of Europe is a way to organize a common action on the European level by recognizing, by guaranteeing the autonomy of the member states. I don't want a superstate. I'm against the European superstate. Nothing has to be... I don't want a system where everything is decided by Brussels here next door in the European Commission. I want a system in which, where there is an added value on the European level, let's do it on the European level.
But isn't the big fundamental problem is that you are losing this battle? So even from 2006...
The opposite.
No, well, we are seeing the rise of Euroscepticism. The second biggest country in the European Union is, we think, on the verge of leaving. So ultimately, your battle of ideas, you're losing out. In your earlier answer, you referred to, one country might be against something. That's why we need majority voting. You might end up in the minority in Europe, in which people do not want to live in the United States.
Since Brexit, what we see is that there is a huge majority in every country of the European Union in favor of the European project. People are not against the European dream. People are not against the European project. People are against the way we translate this European project into the European Union of today. That's their problem. They are saying, yeah, but we are failing in translating this European cooperation into real action. For example, on migration, for example, on European defense and things like that. That's the problem. So on top of that, what is crazy for the moment is that populists and nationalists are not longer saying that they want to go out of the European Union.
All right, so here's
let me continue. Let me continue 1 minute. So in the past, they were in favor of Nexit, the Dutch going out, Frexit, the French going out, Dexit, the Danish going out.
But what they do
today they don't even use the word
What they
Dexit.
do want is a very different Europe from the one that you envisage.
Yeah, what type of Europe?
And they're gaining support and you're
Tell me, what type of Europe?
Okay.
They want the Europe of more powerful member states. And the problem, I have already given an example with the migration, the problem are the member states, that they are blocking the solutions inside the European Council. So what nationalists and populists are proposing is more of the disease of Europe.
Okay,
the fact that member states are blocking the
Mr. Verhofstadt, here's another topic that require a lot of European cooperation and also being used as in rhetoric of, we could say, the far right or populists. Okay, let's get our first video question here. It is sent in by Anuna de Weber from the Belgian Youth for Climate, and she's one of the organizers of the recent climate strikes. And here is her question for you.
Right now, we are facing an existential crisis, and nothing has been seriously done to prevent it. So I'm asking, what are you gonna do and your party in Europe to fight the climate crisis on a serious level?
It's becoming a serious election topic as well. So what are you going to do about climate crisis?
Two things what we want to do. We want to go from a defensive approach of climate change to a more offensive approach of climate change. And that means two things. The first is to put climate change as a condition to make deals with Europe. I think that is our strength. What is our strength? Our strength is an enormous common market of 500 million of consumers and people. And in negotiations with China, with America, we have to use that trade in saying, look, to, for example, Trump, if you want a free trade deal with us, you need to apply the Paris Agreement on climate change.
Which he will never do. So
no, we'll never do. You are saying that.
Okay.
Tomorrow there can be another president there. You never know. And if we don't use that argument, he will never change his mind, naturally. So that's the first thing to do. And the second thing to do, in my opinion, is to create what I call European champions on the transformation of our economy into a more ecological economy. For example, why can we not? So we already missed, in fact, the huge digital revolution, because Facebook, Google, Amazon are all, in fact, American companies and Asian companies like Alibaba. So maybe we can create the champions of the world in ecological transformation. For example, the biggest company worldwide on new batteries, the biggest company worldwide on hydrogen, the biggest company worldwide, to give another example, in food on environmental meat, for example, so that animals have not to suffer anymore. That is what we need to do, from a defensive way of approaching climate change, in saying this is not possible, this is not possible, this is not possible, into an offensive way
knowing that this could cost.
of tackling the problem.
Indeed, well, it's a big issue, as are all the other ones we covered in, the last 15 minutes or so. How are you reacting at home? Let's get over to our social media hub now for an update from Maeve and Jack. What are people saying online, guys?
Well, Darren, loads of reactions tonight and loads of people watching on our Facebook stream from Poland, from Germany, from Scotland, from Spain. So hello to you all and thank you for all those comments. We've one in there from David Fort Swain. He says he comes from Ghent, where the statue in the square points to England. Guy Verhofstadt is a great friend of the UK. He would make a great president. We've Luigi in Italy saying, go Guy, and Viv, a retired man, saying, thank you, Guy, for being an honourable politician. Unlike our government, it's so sad for all of us if we have to leave the European Union. But Maria McGowan is writing in here saying she wants to see Matteo Salvini head. She said Brexit means leave, and that's what should be happening. Another point here, we have migration is one of the main reasons that the UK wants to leave the European Union. And then Paul Rooney writing into us to say the EU needs reform. That's true. The UK, rather than quit when things get bad, should remain and help shape that reform from within. He says we are not quitters.
One of the issues that we have been receiving questions about as well is whether you stand up for political prisoners in Spain regarding Catalonia. Morgan on Twitter doesn't believe that you do. Now, the question that we're being asked from Facebook on this one is from Christos Muzevinevirus, who is in Ireland, and he says there's obviously a surge of populism and Euroscepticism across the continent. Are further actions needed to convince the voters of the necessity to keep the EU strong and fully functioning? Are further actions necessary, Guy Verhofstadt?
I think so, yeah. And the best way to tackle nationalism and populism is to establish an alternative for populism and nationalism, not to repeat their rhetoric, not to repeat their arguments, but to say, look, if you have criticism towards the European Union, I can understand it. I'm maybe the first Eurosceptic, and even more Eurosceptic than nationalist and populist when it concerns the working of the European Union. But I believe that the solution for these problems is not by going back into history, by going back, hiding behind the borders of the nation states, but to develop a vision for a new Europe in the new age of empires in which we live. Because that's the reality. The world is changing. The world is dominating by whom? By Chinese, by Indians, by by Americans, by
Mr.
Russians.
Verhofstadt.
And so we need a new European concept and not to go back and say, oh, the nation states will save it.
But the thing is, in 2009, you also said the same thing. More Europe is needed for the problems. And at that time, there was Euroscepticism on the rise. It was the time of the crisis. 10 years on today, we still have the same problem and maybe even more criticism,
something changed fundamentally.
So what the centrists doing
what has
wrong?
changed fundamentally is that with Emmanuel Macron, which we're going to create a new group in this European Parliament, there are now European leaders like Emmanuel Macron who are really from the opinion that only a reformed, a renewed European Union is the solution. And that's quite new for France, because in France normally the public opinion is not so very much, certainly not the politicians, in favor of more European cooperation. But with Emmanuel Macron, that changed. So what we're going to do is to work together with him to establish here in this House a new, broad, reformist group in the center of the political landscape. And the main program will be to reform and to renew Europe. And we will not enter in a coalition because normally the two big parties, Socialists and Conservatives, will lose their majority because for the first time in history. And we have said very clearly and very openly, we will not make a coalition if there is not, first of all, an agreement on a new program for a renewed and reformed European Union that is capable to act, to react to the challenges of today. What is not the case today.
But just very quickly on this, you have rightly addressed that there is the fragmentation, at least, of politics across Europe. Do you and can you understand the concerns of those voters who are switching their votes to far-right parties and to populist parties, because you know what? They are not at ease with the direction of travel of the
EU. They feel left behind.
And they do not understand your big policies on things like migration.
I'm not at ease with the direction of the European Union either. That's the reason why I'm saying I'm maybe the first Eurosceptic of your Eurosceptics in the European Union. I think that this European Union, as it works today, or as it doesn't work today, will not survive even the 21st century. But the solution for the challenges that we are facing today is not to go back to nationalist and populist rhetoric of the 20th century. What we need to do is to reform the European Union. That is, for example, to establish a European Commission that is replaced by a European government, a small European government, not a big European Commission. That is, for example, to replace the waste of money we have in Europe on military by a European army. That is to replace the bad policies of the member states on migration with the European border and coast guard. That is our solution.
It's still more Europe.
No. You say that, but I'm saying exactly the opposite. When I'm saying, for example, we don't need a European Commission of 28, we need a European government of 12 or 15 ministers. That's not a bigger European Union. That's a more effective European Union. It's not a question of less or more. In some areas it is less, in others it is more.
OK, let's kind of pick things up a little bit, if they're not already fast enough. And we're going to ask you some binary questions, all right, Mr. Verhofstadt, on yes, no. So list of questions.
Only yes, no.
You can only say yes or no.
Most difficult questions for politicians.
Brace yourselves. Is China a threat?
No.
Strasbourg, is it a waste of money?
We are in Brussels here, right? Yes.
Would you revoke Article 50?
Revoke Article 50?
Should it be revoked? Yes or no?
Revoked? If I was a Brit, I should say yes, but I'm not a Brit.
Is Jeremy Corbyn a Brexiteer? Yes or no?
Everybody says it, yeah, so I think yes.
Would you describe yourself, or are you part of the elite?
I'm already so long part of the elite that I'm no longer part of the elite.
Yes or no?
Yes or no?
So yes then.
Turkey, should it become an EU member state?
No.
Would you shake Viktor Orban's hand?
Yes, but that doesn't make any difference about my very critical opinion about Viktor Orban.
Two final questions. Electric scooters, yes or no?
Electric scooters, how it works. That's these steps.
They're all over the place in Brussels.
Yeah, I see them. Greens one and so on.
You're not a user.
My son uses it.
You're not a user, OK.
No. But yes.
OK, and finally, wine, over beer?
Yeah, but that every time, and I have many times this question, it's wine. Even when
Even
I'm
in
in Belgium,
Belgium?
I know, but
Even
I think that wine in Europe is civilization.
Not beer.
It has been the Roman
As
in the
a
Roman
Belgian, is
Empire.
it
All the Roman
blasphemous?
Empire are
Right.
wine-drinking countries.
You know what?
Well,
That
there
may
you
be
go.
your most controversial policy
I
to date.
know. All right, so if you have just joined us, you are watching Raw Questions, a special series of shows with the candidates for Europe's top job. And tonight, we are joined by the Liberal candidate, Guy Verhofstadt, and we want to put your questions to him. So all of that contact information will be on your screen shortly. You do get in touch by Facebook, email, and don't forget to tweet us using the hashtag #RawPolitics.
And while we gather those questions for Mr. Verhofstadt, let's take a look at tonight's You Said It, which comes from last week, when, of course, you went over to England, crossed the channel, to campaign in the UK.
I think that people can, first of all, change their opinion. That's happening. That can happen. And let's see what these elections... So I have to tell you, I was involved in this Brexit negotiation for a long time. I'm not here as a Brexit negotiator. I'm here as the leader of the Liberal and Democrats for Europe to support the most pro-European party, the Lib Dems. And secondly, I think it's a good ground to launch our program also in London, in Britain, because it's already clear that Brexit has done far more damage than has ever been predicted by those who have made the campaign.
Isn't the big problem is that all looks very good, but when the camera pans away, there's actually very few people there. And ultimately, when you... Well, there are. There's only about 30 or 40 people there. People are not as animated in the UK, and people would argue that you're campaigning... In fact, Jacob Rees-Mogg, one of the leading Brexiteers, said, actually, you should come over more often because you're great for the Brexiteers as you spur on support for Brexit by campaigning there.
I think I was there to support Vince Cable, the Lib Dems, the most pro-European party there. And we got a lot of reactions, positive reactions. And also a negative one, the negative one of the Brexiteers, naturally, because they don't like the Lib Dems and they don't like my opinions about all this. But it was what I see is, maybe you follow also a little bit what is happening in Britain for the moment. It's true that the Conservatives are penalised by this new party, by the Brexit party. But on the other hand, what you see is a concentration of the pro-European voters on the Lib Dems. So what I think will happen is a big fight in these elections, and I never was in favour of these elections.
Okay, we do
a
have
big
a
fight
question.
between, at the one hand, the Brexit party, and at the other hand, the Lib Dem party as the most pro-European party in Britain. Let's see what will happen.
Okay,
That's democracy.
We do have a question from Susan in Hampshire in the UK. So let's take a look at that question.
Over the last few days, you have been recorded live on camera on the EU election campaign trail in the United Kingdom with the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Vince Cable. You stated that one of your prime reasons for coming and joining Vince Cable was to send a clear message to the peoples of Europe not to copy the example of the British on Brexit. My question to you is, what do you think gives you the right to send veiled threats to EU citizens and also to interfere in the democratic processes in sovereign states?
To your point, Darren, there. So what
But
are you replying
European
to her?
elections. I'm there as a European. I mean, Vince Cable is a European. It's a crazy question because people in Britain think that European elections is about Britain. It's not about Europe. While European elections are all what?
But isn't that the
she's
point?
reflecting a
But
point
isn't
of
that
view
the
there.
point that's why Britain voted to
Exactly.
leave?
Yeah, but that's the problem. They have a problem to leave.
But
they are already struggling 2 years to find a position to leave.
Let's go
I
back.
follow it from day one, and I can tell you, I have never seen a situation in a country, in a parliament, where they're always voting against something and never in favour of
But Mr.
something.
Verhofstadt,
They're voting against a no deal, they're voting against the deal, they're voting against the customs union, they're voting against the single market, but never...
But you're
they have
talking
told
about
us
the
what they
politicians.
want.
You're talking about the politicians, sure. But when you see, you can't just dismiss a question like that because that is perhaps representative too of a certain demographic of voters in the UK.
Well, again, it's about European elections, and European elections is a question for all Europeans.
But isn't the question then, are you being helpful in this process, considering you don't want to... No, in a sense, there was a BBC documentary a few days ago in which some of your advisors, I think it was jokingly, were talking about colonising the UK and about them agreeing to terms and conditions. But doesn't that feed into the perception that people have in the UK that essentially Brussels is A, not playing a fair game, and B, that they're not really taking this seriously. They're not understanding the concerns of Brexit supporters.
That's not true. What the documentary has shown is exactly the opposite. That is the unity of the European Union. That's unity of the 27 member states of the European Union. That's unity of the three institutions of the European Union, the Commission, the Council and the Parliament. And that is the fact that in Europe we are saying, look, Britain can maybe decide to go out of the European Union, but we will never allow the Brexiteers to kill the European Union, to end the European Union, what is in fact the case. Some Brexiteers are openly saying the only thing what we want is the end of the European Union. We will never let it happen. They can make their choice about in or out, but we will never allow that they kill the European Union.
It's interesting, the perception of how it is perceived depending on where you're watching from. All right, let's get another question from our audience, which comes from Alan Arens from ULB. So what is your question, Alan?
Hi, Mr. Verhofstadt. About fake news, there is right now a growing mistrust of the European citizens against the mainstream medias. I know a few websites and platforms on the internet working, such as Ask for Evidence and Ghostbusters, working to fight fake news. So they collect proven information, scientific information. What would you do as a European level to tackle that? Tackle the fake news?
Well, I think that there are fact checkers, and I think that's very important that they exist. But it is, in my opinion, not sufficient. Because today, when you go on the social media, you have no other choice than Facebook. Facebook has a monopoly. And what Facebook is doing with their algorithms is showing to you and to everybody else more of the same opinion. You never receive, when you are clicking on your Facebook page, opposite opinions, so that you can make up your own mind. Their algorithms are not working like that. So the first thing what I should do when I am President of the Commission is to make and propose regulation to the Council and to the European Parliament to control that these algorithms are showing the different opinions that exist in the society and not always repeating the same opinion as it is the case now with their algorithms. That's the first thing to do. And that is, in my opinion, more important than what Facebook is trying to do. Facebook has more or less 20,000 scrutineers somewhere in India to say, this page we will show it, that page we don't show it. I don't think it's Mr. Zuckerberg who has the right to decide what pages you can see. I think what we need is contradictory opinions.
What if they said no? What if they said no, we're not going to do that? What would you do then?
No, the question is that in the meanwhile, Zuckerberg, who came here to the parliament, you remember that? First of all, he said no, that was 1 year ago. And a few weeks ago, he came back and I say, I have it no longer under control. I want that the public authorities, American authorities, European authorities, come in and organize it because I have it no longer under control. And that is an enormous important step by Facebook, recognizing that they lost control over their social media. And the second thing what we need to do, so Zuckerberg is now recognizing that there is a need for regulation by public authorities, a little bit like GDPR. We have already these privacy rules now that works quite well. We need to go further in that direction.
Well, let's see what people are saying on social media to that, on Facebook, and indeed elsewhere. Let's go over to our social media hub. Jack and Maeve are still standing by. What have they been saying, guys?
That's right, we've had a lot of comments across Facebook on that Facebook stream. Keep them coming in, we are still reading them. Antonio, he says, stop wasting time. We want a United States of Europe, as you've been saying. We heard from Lasse, he says that the temperature seems to be rising as this interview continues here on Raw Politics. And Octavian has been saying on Facebook that he likes what you say, Guy Verhofstadt, but he needs to feel more European, that people need to feel more European.
Absolutely. And meanwhile, we have from Julia Anisco here, more a reminder. She says, the Lib Dems are not the only pro-European political party in the UK. Don't forget about UK Volt, the British chapter of Volt Europa, she says. And then Khaled Subani has written to us here on Twitter with a question for you, Guy Verhofstadt. He says, freedom of expression and the freedom to publish have been used for dangerous ideas and sinister associations. To what extent would you go to regulate these freedoms online?
Yep. Last question is a question we already discussed. So my proposal is not to try to forbidden everything on internet and on Facebook, but to control the algorithms, as I said.
But you have to draw the line between
so
fake,
that people receive the different opinions, not one opinion every time, or an extension of that opinion, or an amplification of that opinion, but different opinions, and can make their own mind. Because I believe that people are smart enough to know when they have different opinions before them, what is the right one and what is the fake one.
OK, well, there we go. It is an ongoing discussion in these elections and indeed in this Parliament. Now, don't forget, you are watching Raw Questions here on Euronews, and this is your chance to put questions to the man who wants to be sitting in Jean-Claude Juncker's seat in a few months' time. All of the contact details of how to get involved are on your screen. We still want you to get in touch. You've got about 15 minutes or so. You can send us a message on Facebook. You can write us an email, email rawpoll@euronews.com, or you can also send us a tweet with your views using the hashtag #RawPolitics.
Yes, we are waiting for your comments and questions, so do get in touch. And while we wait for your questions, let's see what Guy Verhofstadt's colleagues really think of him. Here are some personal reflections they sent us.
First of all, he's clever.
Competent, determined, direct.
Optimists, passionate, and visionary.
Vision, ambition, and a real European.
Strong, passionate, liberal.
Intelligence, vision, and passion.
Passionate, devoted, real European liberal.
He's a very impressive speaker.
He is the best speaker, the best debater I ever met.
He is a really good negotiator.
He is a powerhouse of a politician. He never stops.
He has enormous drive in order to push his ideas forward.
Guy's greatest strength is that he can bring people together.
Well, things are not going fast enough for him, so he's a little bit impatient.
I think it's impatience.
Maybe it is his impatience.
Sometimes, like me, it seems that he's losing his temper.
He won't take no for an answer.
Well, he talks a lot, and he has a big weakness for a very good British car, the Aston Martin.
I do remember negotiations on the budget with the Socialist Party, and they were blocking. In fact, they were doing a strike, so he went to his office and he went reading a book. That works, because they came back.
Whenever things get stuck, politically stuck, what he does is he invites people for a good meal, and it's most of the times it's a good Italian meal.
He loves Italy, Tuscany in particular, and he speaks quite a good Italian with a Belgian accent that makes the whole speech so funny.
His real good friends, almost all of them are writers, so he's very much into literature.
What a special memory was in Rwanda when we went there with Guy Verhofstadt. He was Prime Minister. I was Minister of Foreign Affairs, and he went there and he asked for forgiveness to the Rwandan people. It was just great.
I think we were all laughing there when you described...
interviewed positive people, so thank you very much. You could make something completely different.
There are lots of enemies, of course. But friends are always nice. But you are apparently impatient with a bit of a fiery temper.
That's true, I'm impatient, yeah. That's
proud
true.
of it?
And the reason is why, certainly on the European level, I want that the things go forward. I have seen for a too long time, politicians in Europe were always explaining us, yeah, okay, but we will do it with little steps forward. Well, I think that the world is going so fast today that it is not enough to go with little steps forward. It's more and more a process of Echternach. You know Echternach? Yeah. 2 steps forward, one step backwards. Back. That is typical for Europe. And that's not enough in the world of tomorrow.
It's always that thing, isn't it, that it's like in a job interview where you always turn a negative around to a positive.
Isn't it, right? Your biggest weakness.
Well,
all right.
Yeah, why not?
OK, well, let's go back to our studio audience now. Let's get a question from Milena Albouf from ULB. So, Elena.
Hello, Mr. Verhofstadt.
Hello.
I'm very happy to be here and to be able to ask my question because I do believe that you're not only impatient but also a visionary, and the combination of the two might be something that we deeply need today. My question goes towards a very difficult topic today, the rule of law. I come from Romania, and we are a bit at the limits of disappointment. And I was wondering, in the context of a more and more polarized Europe, what will a new commission do in order to improve the rule of law in the member states? Thank you.
Yeah. Today, what the Commission is doing is not bad, but it's certainly not sufficient. They are writing letters to these countries, to Hungary, to Poland, to Romania now, the new letter, a few days ago, 2 days ago, but it's not enough. What we need is, in my opinion, a real rule of law and democracy pact in Europe. Like we have a stability pact for the economy, why do we not have a rule of law pact on the application of the rule of law and democracy, human rights in the member states? And then if a country doesn't fulfill the conditions, like for example is the case today in Romania, in Hungary, in Poland, then we take sanctions. Sanctions could be even financial sanctions. That doesn't mean that we take away the money towards the people. We could put it aside so that the money is not longer going to these governments who are responsible for breaching the rule of law and the democracy in their countries. So that will be my proposal, to have such a pact with sanctions included. Because writing letters, I have enough of writing letters. I wrote a lot of letters also in these cases without any result.
Do you agree that the Austrian Chancellor, that maybe it requires treaty change?
Not at all. I'm for treaty change, so that there is no misunderstanding.
But then isn't the fundamental problem that actually there is now such a chasm between actually some countries, particularly in Eastern and Southern Europe, and their view of what is the rule of law, what are European values, that actually you might not be able to kind of bring them together, and that actually this East-West divide is a divide that Europe is not going to be able to manage into the future?
There is not an East-West divide. There is a divide in the brain of these Orbáns of this world, or Dragnea in Romania, or Kaczynski in Poland, who will simply say...
But these are elected governments. They're elected governments.
Let me explain. The rule of law doesn't mean that the majority can do what they want. That is not the rule of law. In a rule of law system, the majority can do what it wants by respecting a number of principles. The decisions of the judiciary, the independence of the judiciary, the freedom of expression, and also the protection of the minorities. That are the 4 points that the rule of law, that the democracy have to respect. And that doesn't mean the absolute power of the majority. That's already something that everybody knows since the 19th century. Now there is Mr. Orbán, who has invented the idea of an illiberal democracy. What is complete contradiction in contradictio in terminis, we are saying. A democracy is respecting also the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary. Okay. And that is what Orbán is not doing. And what I fear that Dragnea, who is the real man in power in Romania, is also not respected.
Well, this is a big issue in places like Poland and Hungary and Romania. If you're at home, please get in touch, particularly if you live in those countries. What else are you saying? Let's go back to Jack and Maeve, who've been tracking your reactions on social media this hour. Guys, what have you got for us?
Well, we've got loads, Darren. Lots of people have been writing in tonight on Facebook, so thank you for that. Lots of people writing in as well from Scotland, wondering what you think about their future. Lots of people writing in as well from Volt Europe, that group, wondering if you will make friends with them. Lots of comments coming in here tonight, and one about Strasbourg as well, saying that, you know, that just has to stop. Money cannot be spent in this way.
Indeed, and the question that we have from Derek Maher, he's in Ireland, another interesting foreign policy question, because obviously as Commission President, your line on that would be very significant. He wants to know, why are you so anti-Russian, as he puts it? Why, and also, why are you against the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, a big foreign policy and energy issue here in the European Union?
I'm not anti-Russian. I'm not anti-Russian. I'm not anti-Russian. I am only blacklisted by the Russians, but that's another story. I cannot enter anymore in Russia by the and I'm not against Russia. I'm against the Kremlin and against Mr. Putin's way of organizing his society. But I'm, in fact, very much in favor of Russia and of the cooperation between the European Union and Russia. I think that the real future also for them and for us is a big economic area going from the Atlantic Ocean until Vladivostok. But the problem is not Russia or not the Russian people or the Russian citizens. The problem is Putin and the Kremlin, who is really trying to kill democracy, freedom of speech in Russia. So, but I'm not against Russia, even that I am blacklisted by
even though you can't go to Moscow, even if you want to.
No, I cannot anymore,
all right.
unfortunately.
Okay.
Because I like the city.
There's a little game we like to play on Raw Politics. It's the word association game. So I'll say something and you say the first thing that comes to your mind, okay? So let me just read it to you. Look at me.
That seems
Don't look
to be
at there.
very difficult.
Okay. There you go. Let's start. Theresa May.
Theresa May, Prime Minister of Britain.
No, come on. You can do better than that. Nigel Farage.
Yeah, a difficult Brexit here.
And in one word, veganism.
Give me meat.
No, that's 3 words. Okay.
Yeah, meat.
Guy Verhofstadt.
Maybe next Commission President.
There you go.
Or impatient or fiery.
Yellow vest protests.
Sorry?
Yellow vest protests.
Yellow vest protest became extreme right-wing populism.
Unite the right.
Unite the right?
That's the slogan that we're talking about populism, so they're trying to unite the right, those belonging to the right. So unite the right.
There are more divisions than unity, I think. Division.
Okay. Turkish democracy.
Non-existing.
Emmanuel Macron.
Best European leader.
Best European leader. Yep. Okay. All right. Well, it is now time to go back to our audience and get a question from Caroline van Kouwenberg. I hope I said that correctly. What is your question, Caroline?
Van Kouwenberg, eh?
Yes, hello, Mr. Verhofstadt.
It's a very Dutch, Flemish name.
Yes, I'm Flemish. My question is related to the technological evolution. So technological skills are becoming ever more important on the employment market. My question is, how will you address the technological skills gap between employment seekers who have those skills and those who doesn't have them?
Well, I think the main problem of Europe in this respect is that there is no digital real market today where young people can use their skills. Somebody with bright ideas to launch a new application on internet or on mobile today has to go, in fact, to America or to Asia to develop them.
But isn't that the problem? And the point is that when you look at Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, none of these companies are European.
That's what I'm saying.
They're all American.
Why? You know
that's part of Europe's
why is
problem.
that?
Well, because there is no one regulator. If, for example, Spotify was an example, some people are thinking here that Spotify is an American company. No, it was a Swedish company who went then to America because it was not possible to launch really their business as they want in Europe, because they need 28 authorizations from 28 national regulators.
But Mr. Verhofstadt, isn't it also...
That's the problem here.
No, but isn't it also not a cultural problem? I mean, I've come from Ireland. We use contactless cards. There is technology at use. I come to Belgium, and it's like I've come back to 2003. And that's a cultural thing about the fact that many Europeans aren't actually very adaptive to recent and new technology?
I don't agree with you. If you launch, like I say, Spotify is an example, but there are other examples. There are many things that are developed, new technologies in Europe. And not in America and not in Asia. The only problem is that we cannot develop them. We sell them to the Americans. We sell them to the Asians because it's not. So what I think we need to do, that is one regulator, digital regulator, the fastest as possible, and also to get rid of this 130 different mobile operators, because you need 130 different contracts with mobile operators to do something. And then thirdly, I think we need to speed up the whole Erasmus program that we have, and not only for university students, but also for other people, other young people. Because I think the fact that our young people are traveling more, studying more at other universities is really the good ground to have and to have these technological skills that we are missing today.
Well, speaking of technology, we're going to go for one last time over to our social media hub, join Jack and Maeve, who've been following what Mr Verhofstadt has been saying, and I've got tweets and Facebook messages and all that sort of stuff.
Well, this time we're taking a look at CrowdTangle, which is how we've been analysing the social media accounts of the Spitzenkandidaten throughout this process. We've got the individual ones. Basically, we're looking at comments, shares, likes on your individual Facebook page. And I've got to say, Guy, you've been doing pretty well throughout these interviews. You've been consistently at the top, and at the moment you're running on 67% of traction on your Facebook. Your competitors like Manfred Weber, he's down on 1%. Franz Timmermans here on 4% from the Socialists. You have had a consistently good run on Facebook throughout this process, and that probably might help you throughout these elections as well.
But Guy Verhofstadt, no time for complacency, because when it comes to your party, the ALDE, the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe, you're not doing so well. You're third there. The European Greens are ahead with 36%, and the Movement for Europe of Nations and Freedom, so the party of Marine Le Pen and Matteo Salvini, well, they're number 2.
But I don't think Mr Verhofstadt has any problems on Twitter, do you? I mean, you're always out there.
No, I discovered it... how many years ago? I think 5 years ago. I started with all this in the previous campaign in 2014. And I have to tell you, it was my secretary, Katrien van den Broek, who came to me. You have to be on the social media. I said, what? What is a social media? Well, a Twitter account and a Facebook account. And she started it with us. I didn't believe it in the beginning. I said, no, it's only the direct contact that counts. But you can never naturally... I have 370,000 followers on Twitter. You cannot have every day a contact with 370,000 people, or the more than 600,000 followers on
and you tweet personally. You tweet personally.
Yeah, I do it, yeah. From time to time, they propose me a tweet, my team, or I propose them a tweet. It's a two-way street.
Okay.
Good stuff.
Now, when we look at that, we know. Okay, so Mr Verhofstadt, it is fair to say that you do get quite hot under the collar when debating in Parliament, as we've seen earlier. So for today's raw moment, let's take a look at the evidence.
Close them in a room. That's the only way they understand. I don't know what to do. Every day changing your opinion. We never see concrete proposals of reforms. We are going backwards instead of forwards. Better to have him inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in. Member states are reluctant to transfer new sovereignty. Sorry, Jean-Claude, I'm not in agreement with you. Is that the way? Is that what you want? You can get it, huh? You have a problem in the council. Your interest is not a Hungarian interest. In the past it was different. So what you can now, and show that you're a real leader and not a false prophet. Do it!
Do you find that approach works for you to get your ideas across?
That's a parliament. What's a parliament? The parliament is the place of debate. And if you don't have a real debate, then a parliament is useless. We have to make legislation, but at the same time, go forward with our opinions. And that are the debates for. I have gone these debates with Tsipras, with with Orban, I think, one of two times with
you're not there
Tusk.
to make
So one
friends,
of the
clearly.
elements there it was purely political in saying the way the European Council is working doesn't deliver. Why? Because you don't lock them into the meeting room.
Okay, on that note,
lock them into the meeting room. Then they are obliged to do so.
Well, that is it, I'm afraid, for tonight. Don't forget again to join us tomorrow when we'll be talking to Jan Zedel, the candidate for the Conservatives and Reformists. That's at 9 p.m. Brussels time here on Euronews. In the meantime, of course, get in touch. Please send us your questions via social media.
So we'd like to thank our studio audience, of course, everybody at home who sent your questions, and of course, Mr. Guy Verhofstadt, thank you very much for being on the program. Thanks for watching, guys.
Good night, bye.